I'm Liam. I'm 32 years old, and at my family's Christmas dinner, I watched my life, as I knew it, burn to the ground when I told them I was worth $28 million. Before I tell you about the utter chaos that followed and the fraud that nearly destroyed everything I'd built, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. Alright, let's get into it. The air in my parents' Denver home was thick with the scent of pine needles and roasting turkey, a combination that was supposed to smell like joy but always felt like an obligation to me. Outside, a gentle snow was falling, blanketing the quiet suburban street in a pristine white sheet, the kind you see in holiday movies. Inside, however, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that had been gathering strength for 32 years. My younger brother, Ethan, was holding court at the head of the dinner table, a position he assumed naturally, as if by birthright. At 28, he was the living embodiment of the golden child trope. Handsome, effortlessly charming, and radiating the unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no and truly believed it was because he never deserved to be. And the projections for the first phase of the development are just staggering, he announced, gesturing grandly with his fork, nearly sloshing wine onto the tablecloth. We're talking a massive return on investment. The city planners love the concept. It's going to be the talk of the town. My mother, Helen, was hanging on his every word, her face glowing with a pride so intense it was almost blinding. "Oh, Ethan, that's my boy," she beamed, reaching over to pat his arm. "He's always had such big plans. A real visionary. Not everyone is born with that kind of drive." The remark was followed by a quick, almost imperceptible glance in my direction. I felt it more than I saw it. A tiny, familiar splinter of ice. My father, Richard, sat at his end of the table, a quiet sentinel of approval. He smiled and nodded along, raising his glass in a silent toast to his brilliant son. He was a master of quiet affirmation, as long as that affirmation was directed at Ethan. The conversation drifted, but eventually, as it always did, the spotlight swung around to find me in my shadowy corner. It was my cousin Chloe who aimed it. With a smile that never quite reached her eyes, she asked, her voice deceptively sweet, "So, Liam, what about you? Still plugging away at that computer stuff?" I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the dull ache of being minimized. Computer stuff, a decade of my life, the grueling hours, the sleepless nights fueled by cheap coffee, the constant, gnawing risk of failure, the sheer intellectual effort. All of it bundled up and dismissed with two careless words. I took a slow sip of water, trying to douse the fire in my gut. "It's going well," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Well?" my mother pressed, her tone laced with an impatience she reserved just for me. "What does well mean exactly? Your brother is building an empire from the ground up. Are you even making a decent salary? Do you have a proper retirement fund?" Something inside me, a tightly wound spring of resentment I'd been compressing for years, finally snapped. Maybe it was the condescending tone. Maybe it was the casual dismissal of my life's work. Or maybe, after a lifetime of making myself small to keep the peace, I was just done. I set my glass down with a soft click. "The company was just valued," I said, my voice dangerously calm in the sudden quiet. "It's worth $28 million. Silence. Not just a lack of noise, but a heavy, weighted vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. The clinking of silverware stopped. The mindless holiday chatter died. Every single eye at that table, from my youngest cousin to my oldest aunt, swiveled to me. For one brief, shimmering second, I saw pure, unadulterated shock on their faces. Then the shock curdled. Ethan's face, flushed pink with wine and self-congratulation, contorted. The color deepened to a blotchy, furious red. A vein I'd never seen before started pulsing on his forehead. "What did you say?" he hissed, leaning across the table. $28 million. I repeated, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my own tongue. He slammed his fork down. It clattered against his porcelain plate, the sound as sharp and violent as a gunshot in the silent room. You're lying. You're sitting there, making that up, just to humiliate me on Christmas. Why would I lie about that, Ethan? I asked, my own calmness fueling his rage. Because you're jealous, he roared, shoving his chair back and getting to his feet. The chair legs screeched against the hardwood floor. You've always been a jealous, bitter loser, hiding in your room with your stupid computers. My mother jumped into the fray, her voice rising to a shrill, piercing cry. Liam, how could you? How could you say such a thing? And how could you have that kind of money? You're just you. She looked at me as if I'd confessed to a terrible crime, as if my success was a deep, personal betrayal to her vision of the family hierarchy. The accusations started flying from all corners, a hailstorm of resentment and disbelief. But through the noise, my eyes were fixed on one person, my father. He just sat there, his fork still halfway to his mouth, his face a perfect, unreadable mask of neutrality. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He did nothing. In a room filled with shouting and crying, his silence was the loudest, most deafening sound of all. And to understand the crushing, devastating weight of that silence, you have to understand the silence that had shaped and defined my entire childhood. Growing up, our house on the quiet, tree-lined street was a meticulously maintained stage, and the play, which ran continuously for 18 years, had only one star, Ethan. I wasn't the understudy. I was the stagehand, the invisible figure in the wings who made sure the props were in place, the lights were working, but was never, ever meant to step into the spotlight. The difference in our roles was never starker than on Ethan's 16th birthday. I was almost 18. I woke up to a commotion on the lawn, a series of excited yelps and one long, sustained car horn blast. Peeking through the blinds of my small bedroom, I saw it. A brand new, cherry-red convertible sitting in the driveway. It wasn't just new. It was absurdly perfect, gleaming under the morning sun, with a giant, ridiculous white bow on its hood. Ethan was doing a victory dance on the lawn while my parents hugged him, their faces absolutely incandescent with joy. He's a good kid. He deserves it, I heard my father say, his voice thick with pride. That very afternoon, my own car fund, a stained envelope in my sock drawer, contained a grand total of $87.42, painstakingly saved from my job bussing tables at a local diner. I had to approach my dad in the den where he was reading his newspaper to ask for bus fare to get to that job. He didn't look up. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and held it out to me. Be back by 10, he said, his eyes still on the stock market report. There was no malice in the gesture, no deliberate cruelty. That was the most painful part. It was just transaction. I was a background detail, a minor expense in the grand, glorious production of raising Ethan. This dynamic permeated every aspect of our lives. Ethan brought home a C+ on a history paper, and it was framed and hung on the refrigerator. He's just not an academic, but look how hard he tries. My mother would gush to any visitor who would listen. My straight-A report cards, earned through long nights of studying, were met with a simple, "That's nice, dear," before being placed in a folder somewhere, never to be seen again. When Ethan made the junior varsity soccer team, mostly sitting on the bench, my father bought season tickets. He attended every game, cheering louder than anyone. The year I won the state science fair for a complex, working model of a sustainable irrigation system, a project that took me 4 months to build, my father glanced at it in the garage, nodded, and said, "Huh, clever." A week later, he broke it down for scrap wood to build a new shelf for Ethan's sports trophies. The breaking point for my teenage self came one evening when I tried, foolishly, to appeal to my mother's sense of fairness. "Mom," I started, my voice shaky with a mix of nerves and injustice. "Why does Ethan get everything? The car, the private school tuition. I'm working 20 hours a week just to save for a community college fund, and you're asking me to contribute to the grocery bill." She sighed, a long, weary sound of a woman burdened by an unreasonable child. She was wiping down the kitchen counter, and she didn't even turn to look at me. "Liam, you're the older brother. You're more responsible, you're more mature. You can handle it. Ethan, He needs a little more help, a little more encouragement. It's your job to understand that, to make sacrifices for your brother. You should be happy to yield to your little brother. That's what family does. My gaze shot across the room to my dad, sitting in his favorite armchair in the den, pretending to read his paper. I saw his knuckles turn white where he gripped the pages. He had heard every word. This was it, I thought. This is the moment he steps in. The moment he becomes a father to me, too. I waited, my breath caught in my chest, praying he would look up, that he would say something. Anything. Helen, that's not fair. We're proud of you too, son. Let's talk about this. Anything. He cleared his throat. My heart leaped, and then he just turned the page. The rustle of the newsprint was like a door slamming shut in my face. That was the moment I truly understood. My father wasn't a passive bystander. He was a silent accomplice. His silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a conscious choice. He consistently chose peace over fairness, quiet over conflict. He chose Ethan. And in doing so, he made me invisible. I learned then that my value in that house wasn't tied to my achievements, but to how little trouble I caused, how little I needed, and how quietly I existed in the shadows cast by my golden boy brother. Going away to a state university 3 hours from home wasn't just about getting an education. It was an act of liberation. It was the first time I felt the air was my own to breathe. I paid my own way, a patchwork quilt of a small academic scholarship, the meager savings from the diner, and the wages from 2 new campus jobs. One shelving books in the cavernous, silent library, and another washing dishes in the greasy heat of the student union kitchen. I lived in the cheapest dorm on campus, a cinder-block cell with a perpetually rattling window. I subsisted on a diet that consisted mainly of ramen noodles and free crackers from the cafeteria. My textbooks were all bought secondhand, their pages filled with the notes of students past, and I treated them like holy relics because I knew I couldn't afford to replace them. My roommate, Mark, a loud, funny pre-law student from a big, boisterous Italian family, found my existence to be a source of constant, bewildered fascination. "Dude, seriously? Your parents don't help at all?" he asked one night, watching me meticulously divide my pathetic weekly paycheck into envelopes labeled tuition, food, and rent. "They're putting my brother through a private business school," I said, a line I had repeated so many times it felt like a script. "It's expensive." "Yeah, but you're their kid too, man," he said, shaking his head in genuine disbelief. "That's not just messed up, that's borderline neglect. You should talk to a lawyer." He was only half joking. He didn't know the half of it. My family's support wasn't just absent. It was a one-way street. My mother would call every few weeks, her timing uncannily aligned with when she thought my paycheck would have cleared. The conversation was always a predictable 3-act play. Act 1. A brief, disinterested inquiry about my health and studies. Act 2. A lengthy, glowing monologue about Ethan's latest brilliant business idea, usually some half-baked scheme entirely funded by my parents' dwindling savings. Act 3. The real reason for her call. "So, Liam," she'd say, her voice shifting into a tone of strained, syrupy sweetness, "I was just thinking, now that you have a steady job, maybe you could send a little something home, just to help out. Your brother's startup costs are more than we anticipated. Family has to support family, you know." The first time she asked, I was so stunned I couldn't speak. I was literally choosing between buying a textbook and eating for the last week of the month. "Mom, I can't," I stammered. "I need every dollar for my own tuition and rent." "Oh," she'd say, the sweetness instantly evaporating, replaced by a glacier of cold disappointment. "I see. I guess some people forget where they come from." The line would then go dead, leaving me holding a dead receiver, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and guilt. I majored in computer science because it was the opposite of my family dynamic. It was pure logic. In the world of code, there was no favoritism, no emotional manipulation. An algorithm was elegant or it was inefficient. The code compiled or it failed. The results were based entirely on skill, effort, and intellect. I poured every ounce of my loneliness, my frustration, and my yearning for a fair system into it. The computer lab became my sanctuary. I landed an unpaid internship at a small tech startup in my junior year. It was my first real break, a chance to apply my skills in the real world. I was ecstatic. I made the mistake of calling home to share the news. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, her voice clearly distracted. I could hear Ethan in the background, talking loudly about some party. "Listen, I have to go. Ethan is about to pitch his new app idea to your father. It's a social network exclusively for dog owners. Isn't that just the cleverest thing?" Click. I stood there in the bustling hallway of the computer science building, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow buzz of the dial tone. That was the day I stopped trying. I stopped calling with news, good or bad. I stopped hoping for a crumb of praise from their table. I accepted the cold, hard truth. My path was my own, and I would have to walk it alone. Mark became my family. He was the one who celebrated my small victories, who brought me a beer when a project failed, who saw the work I was putting in and respected me for it. He was the only one who wasn't surprised by what I would eventually build. After graduation, I moved back to Denver, but I made sure my new life was on the opposite side of town, a physical and metaphorical buffer zone from my family. I rented a cramped one-bedroom apartment with a view of a brick wall and got a job as a junior developer at a mid-sized software company. For the first time, I had a real salary, and I was fiercely protective of it. I lived like a monk, saving every dime that didn't go to rent or instant noodles. My nights and weekends weren't spent at bars or on dates. They were spent illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen, building something that was mine and mine alone. The idea was born from a persistent frustration at my day job, a software solution designed to streamline complex data management for small and medium-sized businesses. It was a problem that bored most people to tears, but to me it was an elegant puzzle waiting for an elegant solution. For 2 solid years, that project was my entire world. I coded until my eyes burned. I designed the user interface, built the back-end architecture, and personally squashed thousands of bugs. I poured every ounce of my focus, my discipline, and my quiet ambition into it. And I told no one in my family. It wasn't out of spite, not really. It was an act of pure self-preservation, a lesson learned from a lifetime of experience. I knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a survivor, exactly how they would react. If my venture was small and struggling, it would be Liam's little hobby, a sad, pathetic attempt to emulate his brilliant, entrepreneurial brother. It would be another piece of evidence for the family narrative. Liam, the responsible but uninspired plotter. But if it was successful, that was a far more terrifying prospect. If it was successful, they wouldn't see it as my achievement. They would see it as a family resource. It wouldn't be my company. It would become their opportunity. It would be the new, upgraded savings account from which to fund Ethan's ever-revolving door of game-changing ideas. My success would be reframed as their collective good fortune. So, I built my fortress of silence. When they asked what I was up to, my answers were masterpieces of vagueness. Just working, keeping busy. Mark, now a law student, was my only confidant. He was the one who walked me through the legal maze of incorporating my company, which I named Apex Solutions. He was the one who acted as the official witness when I signed the documents that made it real. "You're really not going to tell them?" he asked as we celebrated with a cheap pizza and warm beer in my sparsely furnished apartment. "What's the point?" I replied, shrugging as if it didn't bother me. "It would just create problems I don't have the energy to deal with. Or," he suggested gently, ever the optimist, "they might finally be proud of you. They might finally see what you've accomplished." I gave him a sad smile, one that felt ancient and weary. "We both know that's not how it works in my family, Mark." The first few years were a brutal grind. More than once, I was tempted to give up, to take a higher-paying, less stressful job and just live a simple, uncomplicated life. One particularly bleak night, after a catastrophic server crash wiped out a week's worth of work, I sat in my dark apartment, my head in my hands, the taste of failure bitter in my mouth. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was a social media post from Ethan. He had tagged me in a photo of him and his new girlfriend, Jessica, on a beach in Hawaii. They were raising champagne glasses to the camera, tanned and carefree. The caption read, "Living the dream. You should try it sometime, bro." A switch flipped inside me. The despair curdled into a cold, hard resolve. I turned my phone off, walked back to my computer, and spent the next 18 hours straight rebuilding the server from scratch, making it stronger and more resilient than before. That casual, condescending taunt became the fuel for my engine. My quiet, secret work was no longer just a project. It was my rebellion. It was the one part of my life they couldn't touch, couldn't criticize, and couldn't co-opt. I was building my own world, one line of code at a time, a world where my value was absolute and determined solely by me. And I was determined to protect that world at all costs. The drive home from that apocalyptic Christmas dinner was the longest, most torturous 20 minutes of my life. My mother had insisted on leaving immediately after my revelation. The three of us, me relegated to the back seat like a disgruntled teenager, my parents in the front, sat in a thick, suffocating silence that was heavier and more menacing than any argument. The car, usually a sanctuary of my father's classic rock, was dead quiet. It was a pressure cooker on wheels, and the tension was making the windows fog up. My mother sat ramrod straight in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of Christmas lights passing by. Her jaw was set so tightly I was surprised her teeth didn't shatter into dust. My father gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the snowy road with an intensity that suggested he was navigating a minefield, not a suburban street. My own mind was a chaotic whirlwind. The shocked faces, the accusations, the raw, unfiltered rage from my family's reaction. It all echoed in my head. A tiny, naive part of me had thought, for a split second, that maybe this would be it. Maybe this would be the thing that would finally make them see me, respect me. Instead, it had painted a giant, glittering target on my back. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a nasty, insistent vibration against my leg. I pulled it out. It was a text from my mother. I was sitting less than 3 feet away from her, in the same enclosed space. The message read, "You have ruined Christmas. I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen, the words glowing in the dark car. A cold fury, clean and sharp, rose in my chest, momentarily eclipsing the hurt. I didn't reply. What could I possibly say? A minute later, it buzzed again. This time, a text from Ethan. "You will pay for this." It wasn't a childish threat. It was a promise. The kind of promise a spoiled, entitled prince makes when a peasant dares to own a plot of land the prince coveted. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, the sharp corner digging into my thigh, a small point of pain to ground me in the surreal moment. We finally pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex. The silence stretched as my father put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine. No one moved. Felt like a standoff. Finally, my mother slowly turned her head, and then her entire body, to face me. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, her face was a twisted mask of fury and betrayal. "How could you, Liam?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that was far more terrifying than her shouting. "How could you keep something like that from us? We are your family. It's my company, Mom. My work. It had nothing to do with you," I said, my voice flat and empty. "It's money," she snapped, her voice rising. "Money that could have helped your brother. Do you have any idea how much he's been struggling to get his real estate project off the ground? The stress he's under? And you've been sitting on millions all this time." The absurdity of the statement almost made me laugh. "He's not struggling, Mom. You and Dad have given him everything he's ever asked for. You paid for his private college fund. You co-signed his first business loan. You let him live at home rent-free until he was 26. That's different. That's what parents do for their children," she retorted. The question slipped out before I could stop it. "And you're not my parents?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time all night, she had no answer. Before she could find one, I opened the car door and stepped out into the frigid night air. The biting cold was a relief, A clean shock to my overwrought system. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked toward the entrance of my building. The sound of the car engine a low, menacing growl behind me. I didn't hear them drive away until I was safely inside my apartment with the door double-locked and bolted. I leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The battle hadn't ended at the dinner table. It had just begun. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in coordinated psychological warfare. They must have stayed up all night planning their strategy. It began, as it always did, with my mother leading the charge, acting as the emotional battering ram designed to soften up the target. She called me the next morning, her voice thick and syrupy with manufactured tears. "Liam, darling," she began. The word darling was a weapon she only unsheathed when she wanted something significant. "I couldn't sleep a wink last night. I'm just so worried about this family. I feel like we're falling apart. Your brother, he's just devastated. He looks up to you so much, even if he doesn't show it." I almost laughed out loud. Ethan hadn't looked up to me a single day in his life. He had always looked past me, or through me, as if I were a slightly inconvenient ghost. "He just feels so betrayed that you didn't trust him with your success," she continued, her voice catching with a theatrical sob. "All he wants is to make us proud. His project, it's his dream, Liam. His entire future is riding on it. A small investment from you, even just a family loan to show his other partners you're on board. That's all he needs. It's your duty, Liam. It's your duty as his older brother to help him." When the guilt trip failed to produce an immediate transfer of funds, it was Ethan's turn. He called a few hours later, his tone a complete 180 from the rage-filled monster at the dinner table. He was smooth, charming, the golden boy salesman turning on the charisma. "Lee, my man," he said, his voice oozing with a bonhomie that was frankly insulting. "Hey, listen, man, about Christmas, I was totally out of line. I was just so shocked, blown away. 28 mil. That is insane. Seriously, I am so proud of you, bro." I remained silent, letting him spin his web. I knew exactly where this was going. "So I was thinking," he went on, undeterred by my silence. "My real estate venture, Davis Properties, it's a game changer. I've got some serious investors lining up, but I want to keep the core of it in the family, You get in on the ground floor. We'll be the Davis brothers, taking over the Denver property market. It'll be legendary. What do you say? $1 million to get the ball rolling. It's pocket change for you, right? A rounding error." "No, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet but firm. The charm vanished as if a switch had been flipped. What do you mean, no?" he asked, his voice hardening. "I mean, the answer is no. I'm not investing in your project." "You selfish bastard," he hissed, the mask of the charming brother disintegrating into dust. "You'd rather sit on your pile of money and watch your own blood fail." He hung up with a slam that made my ear ring. The final, and perhaps most insidious, prong of the attack came later that evening. A call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my cousin, Chloe. "Liam? Hi, it's me," she said, her voice dripping with a cloying, faux concern. "Oh my God. I just heard what happened at dinner. I feel so terrible. I feel like this is all my fault." "Why would it be your fault, Chloe?" I asked, a new sense of dread creeping up my spine. "Well, a few weeks ago Ethan was over, and he was complaining about money and how hard it is to get started. And I might have, mentioned that I'd heard a rumor through the grapevine that you were doing really, really well. Like really well. I was just trying to inspire him, Show him what's possible if he just worked as hard as you do. I never, ever dreamed he'd react like that. I am so sorry, Liam." My blood ran cold. It wasn't an accident. She hadn't let it slip. She had calculated it. She had seen the family dynamic, seen Ethan's jealousy and my parents' favoritism, and she had lit the fuse and walked away, just to watch the fireworks. She had painted a target on my back, all with a sweet smile and a perfectly plausible excuse. This wasn't just my parents and my brother anymore. This was a whole family system, a complex, rotting web of entitlement, jealousy, and manipulation. And I was caught right in the center of it. I felt like I was drowning in their expectations. The calls, the texts, the guilt trips, the demands. It was a relentless, suffocating tide designed to pull me under. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a siege tower. Every buzz of my phone made me flinch. I spent an entire day with it on silent, just to get some breathing room. That evening, I called the one person I knew would throw me a life raft. Mark. I laid it all out for him, pacing back and forth in my living room as I recounted every detail. The disastrous dinner, the barrage of texts, my mother's crocodile tears, Ethan's whiplash-inducing personality switch, Chloe's insidious confession. He listened patiently, making occasional legal-sounding grunts of disapproval, letting me vent until my voice was hoarse and my anger had cooled to a hard, cold resolve. "Okay," he said when I finally finished, his voice calm and steadying. "First of all, take a deep breath. Second of all, I want you to repeat after me. None of this is your fault." I took a shaky breath. "None of this is my fault." "Good," he said. Mark was in his final year of law school, and he had the comforting, authoritative tone of someone who dealt in facts, not emotional blackmail. "You earned your success. You don't owe them a damn thing. Not a dollar, not an explanation, not an apology. What they're doing is a coordinated campaign of harassment and emotional manipulation. And the only way to stop a bully is to punch them in the nose, metaphorically speaking. You need to set a boundary, Liam. A hard one. A clear, unambiguous, legally sound in spirit boundary. Not a request, but a statement. You need to do it now before they escalate this to a whole new level." He was right. This couldn't go on. Every time I had yielded in my life, every time I had made myself smaller to keep the peace, it had just taught them that they could push me further next time. It was time to stop giving ground. It was time to build a wall. With a deep, steadying breath that I held for 5 long seconds, I initiated a 3-way call with my parents and Ethan. It took them a moment of confused silence to realize they were all on the same line. "What is this?" Ethan's voice was sharp, suspicious. "I'm calling you all together so I only have to say this once, and so there are no misunderstandings," I said, my voice firmer and clearer than I thought possible. I pictured Mark standing beside me, a hand on my shoulder. "I am not giving, lending, or investing any money in Ethan's company. Not now, not ever. My company, Apex Solutions, and all of its finances are mine. They are not a family resource or a community savings account. This is my final word on the subject. I am asking you respectfully to not contact me about this again." For a moment, there was a stunned, ringing silence on the other end. I had never spoken to them like this before. The quiet, accommodating Liam was gone. Then the inevitable explosion. "How dare you!" my mother shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, theatrical outrage. "After everything we have done for you, we gave you a home. We fed you. We clothed you. You ungrateful, selfish child. You did what parents are legally required to do, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Ethan jumped in, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you're so big now, don't you, Mr. Big Shot CEO? You're nothing, Liam. You've always been nothing, and you'll always be nothing. Then you shouldn't have any problem succeeding without my nothing money." I shot back, the words tasting like victory. I waited, my heart pounding, for my father to speak, for him to play the peacemaker, the mediator, to find some sensible middle ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was weak, reedy, and full of a desperate disappointment. "Liam, son, let's not be hasty. Let's just all calm down and talk about this. Family is more important than money." "You're right, Dad," I said, and the profound sadness in my own voice surprised me. "It is, and a real family wouldn't be having this conversation." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. This conversation is over, and for the first time in my life I hung up on them. My hand was shaking as I put the phone down. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating mix of liberation and dread. I had finally stood up for myself. I had drawn a line in the sand. But I had a sinking feeling, a cold premonition in the pit of my stomach, that they weren't going to respect it. They were going to try and cross it. And I had no idea how far they were truly willing to go. After that explosive phone call, a strange and unsettling silence fell. The constant, buzzing assault of texts and calls ceased. My inbox remained blessedly empty. It should have been a profound relief, but instead, it felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. It was the eerie, unnatural quiet before a tornado touches down, the way the ocean recedes unnervingly just before a tsunami. My family, I knew, was not the type to simply give up. They were the type to retreat, regroup, and devise a new, more insidious angle of attack. I tried to lose myself in work, to use the complex logic of code as a shield against the chaotic emotions churning inside me. Apex Solutions was on the verge of landing its biggest contract yet, a game-changing deal with a national logistics company that would solidify our position in the market for years to come. I threw myself into the final negotiations, working 16-hour days, hoping that sheer exhaustion would numb the knot of anxiety that had taken permanent residence in my stomach. My assistant, Sarah, a sharp and perceptive woman in her late 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and kind eyes, noticed the change in me. She had been with me since the early days and knew my moods better than anyone. "Everything okay, Liam?" she asked one afternoon, quietly placing a fresh cup of coffee on my desk, right next to a stack of contracts I'd been staring at blankly for an hour. "You seem tense. More than usual. Just family stuff?" I mumbled, unwilling to unload my sordid drama onto her. She gave me a knowing, empathetic look. "Family stuff is the worst stuff," she said simply. She didn't press for details, but her quiet acknowledgement was a small, welcome comfort in my self-imposed isolation. The only contact I had from anyone in my extended family was a bizarre, stilted phone call from my Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother. He was usually a jovial, backslapping kind of guy, quick with a bad joke and a loud laugh. But his voice on the phone was strained, his cheerfulness forced. "Hey, Liam. Just calling to check in. See how you're doing," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Heard you're doing big things. And Ethan, too. Sounds like the Davis boys are really taking over the world." "Huh. Something like that, Uncle Robert," I said cautiously, my guard instantly up. "Yeah, your dad was telling me all about Ethan's new property business. Davis Properties. Sounds very impressive. He's a real go-getter, that one," he rambled on. The whole conversation felt scripted, rehearsed. It was clear he had been dispatched on a fishing expedition, but for what, I wasn't sure. It set my teeth on edge. Why would my dad be bragging to him about Ethan's business right now, in the midst of this Cold War? The final, definitive signal that something was deeply wrong was a small, digital detail that screamed louder than any phone call. I was scrolling through social media late one night, a mindless habit to switch off my overactive brain, when I realized I hadn't seen any of Ethan's typically boastful posts in a while. I searched for his profile. Nothing. He had blocked me. It was such a petty, juvenile thing to do, but the implication was chilling. This wasn't just about giving me the silent treatment anymore. This was about shutting me out completely. They were closing ranks, forming a tight, conspiratorial circle, and I was firmly on the outside, the designated enemy. The silence wasn't peace. It was a conspiracy. They were planning something in the shadows, something that required me to be kept completely in the dark. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, seeped into my bones. I had a terrible, gut-wrenching feeling that I wasn't just fighting for my salary or my company anymore. I was fighting for my name. The storm finally broke on a cold, gray Tuesday morning. It arrived not as a raging phone call or a tearful ambush, but as a quiet, professionally worded email. I was in the middle of a tense meeting, reviewing the final quarterly projections with my finance team, when my phone buzzed with a notification on the conference table. I glanced at it, ready to ignore it, but the subject line made my heart stop cold. Subject: urgent matter regarding Davis Properties and seed funding commitment. The sender was a name I recognized instantly, a name that carried immense weight in Denver's business circles. Eric Thompson. Thompson was a heavyweight investor, a legend in both the tech and real estate scenes. I had pitched to him once years ago when Apex was just a fledgling idea and had been politely but firmly rejected. We hadn't spoken since. Why in God's name was he emailing me? My hands trembled slightly as I discreetly tapped the screen to open the email. The cool, professional language was a stark, terrifying contrast to the raw panic that immediately seized me. Mr. Davis, I am writing to follow up on the investment prospectus for Davis Properties, which was presented to my firm last month by your brother, Ethan Davis. As per our discussions and the partnership agreement we were provided, my firm's commitment of $2.5 million was contingent upon the matching seed funding provided by you as his primary partner and guarantor. The deadline for the deposit of that funding has now passed. Before my legal team proceeds with formal action for breach of contract and misrepresentation, I wanted to reach out to you directly to ascertain the status of your capital injection. Regards, Eric Thompson Capital. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, the words blurring and reforming into a monstrous shape. Primary partner, guarantor, matching seed funding, breach of contract. This was beyond anything I had imagined. He hadn't just used my name as a vague endorsement to his friends. He had built an entire fraudulent enterprise. He had created a company, designed marketing materials, pitched to one of the most respected and ruthless investors in the state, and forged contracts. He had taken my success, the very thing I had built in secret to protect it from them, and used it as the foundational lie for his entire house of cards. And he had signed my name to it, making me legally liable for his fantasy. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a federal crime. I stood up so abruptly that my chair screeched backward, the sound echoing loudly in the silent, stunned meeting room. Every head turned to stare at me. "Sarah?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, all the air having been punched from my lungs. "Cancel the rest of my day. Everything." I walked out of the room without another word, my phone already pressed to my ear. I had only one call to make. "Mark?" I said the moment he answered, my voice shaking with a fury so cold it burned. "We have a very big problem." Mark, to his credit, moved with the speed and precision of a seasoned general mobilizing for war. Within 24 hours, his legal resources and a private investigator he hired had unearthed the full, sickening scope of the deception. It was far worse than I had dared to imagine. Davis Properties LLC was a legally registered company. The incorporation documents, filed 2 months prior, listed 2 founding members, Ethan Davis and Helen Davis. My mother, my own mother, wasn't just a misguided supporter of her favorite son. She was an active, willing co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise. The sting of that particular betrayal was sharp and deep. They had a professionally designed website, glossy marketing brochures filled with architectural renderings of buildings that would never exist, and a full investor prospectus that read like a work of fiction. My name and the name of my company, Apex Solutions, were plastered over everything. In strategic partnership with Liam Davis, the celebrated CEO of the multimillion-dollar tech firm Apex Solutions. There were fabricated quotes attributed to me, praising Ethan's unparalleled vision and shrewd business acumen. And then the final, damning piece of evidence, a scanned copy of the partnership agreement that had been sent to Eric Thompson's firm. At the bottom, next to Ethan's flourishing, arrogant signature, was a clumsy, almost childishly forged version of my own. The sheer, calculated premeditation of it all left me breathless. This wasn't a desperate mistake. This was a carefully planned conspiracy. "This isn't just a civil matter anymore, Liam," Mark said, his voice grim as he laid the stack of printed documents on his polished office conference table. The papers felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "This is felony-level fraud. Wire fraud, forgery, securities fraud. We're talking about serious prison time for both of them if this goes to a prosecutor. Jail." The word hung in the air between us. My mother and my brother in prison. The thought was nauseating, a visceral sickness that churned in my stomach. But what was the alternative? To let them destroy me? To let them drag my name and my company through the mud? To face lawsuits and financial ruin because of their greed? What do we do? I asked, my voice hollow, the question feeling impossibly heavy. We give them one chance, Mark said, his lawyer voice taking over. Calm, strategic, and devoid of emotion. One single chance to fix this themselves. We call a meeting. You, me, them, no one else. You present the evidence and you give them a non-negotiable ultimatum. They dissolve the company, return any money they've already taken from smaller investors, and issue a formal, legally binding retraction to Eric Thompson and anyone else they pitch to. They have 48 hours. If they don't comply, we hand this entire file over to the district attorney's office. It's their choice. The meeting was set for the next evening at my parents' house, the Lion's Den. I felt a cold, metallic taste of dread in my mouth as Mark and I walked up the familiar driveway, the leather briefcase containing the evidence swinging lightly in his hand like a pendulum counting down to doomsday. They were all there, waiting for us in the living room, arranged like a tribunal ready to pass judgment. Ethan was pacing in front of the fireplace. My mother was perched on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands, and my father was sunk deep into his favorite armchair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. What is the meaning of this, Liam? My mother began, her voice sharp with indignation before we were even fully in the room. Dragging a lawyer into a private family business? I ignored her, my eyes locking onto Ethan. Davis Properties, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. Let's talk about it. Ethan scoffed, a desperate attempt to project a confidence he clearly didn't feel. I could see the flicker of pure panic in his eyes. What about it? It's my company. It's none of your business. Mark stepped forward and placed the briefcase on the coffee table. He opened it with 2 decisive clicks that echoed in the tense silence. He began to lay out the documents, one by one, like a dealer laying out a losing hand. The incorporation papers with my mother's name, the glossy, lie-filled brochures, the forged contract. This, Mark said, his voice leaving no room for argument, is a copy of a fraudulent investment contract submitted to Thompson Capital. The signature attributed to my client, he nodded curtly in my direction, is a demonstrable forgery. This brochure falsely claims my client's financial backing and personal endorsement. This Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis, constitutes multiple counts of wire fraud and securities fraud. My mother gasped dramatically, placing a hand over her heart as if she were the victim. Fraud? That's a terrible, ugly word. We were just boosting Ethan's profile, using the family name to give him a little credibility. You used my name, Mom. I cut in, my voice finally rising, shaking with a rage I could no longer contain. You lied to investors, you forged my signature, you claimed I was your partner and that I was funding this entire scheme. It's not a scheme, Ethan yelled, his bravado finally crumbling into a desperate, childish tantrum. It's a legitimate business, and it's not fraud, it's just marketing. Everyone stretches the truth a little bit. This isn't stretching the truth, Ethan. I slammed my hand down on the forged contract, the paper crinkling under the force. This is a crime. You could go to prison for this. Both of you. My mother started to cry then. Not tears of remorse, but big, heaving sobs of a martyr being unjustly persecuted. How can you do this to your own brother? To your own mother? We were only trying to help him succeed. You have so much, why can't you just share it? Why must you be so selfish? Through all of it, my father sat in his armchair, silent as a stone. He hadn't said a single word. He just watched the scene unfold, his face pale and clammy, his eyes darting between my furious face and the damning evidence spread across the coffee table. And I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty that froze the blood in my veins, that the final, most devastating piece of this ugly puzzle lay with him. I consciously tuned out the cacophony of my mother's hysterics and my brother's blustering, pathetic denials. The noise in the room faded to a dull, meaningless roar. My focus narrowed until there was only one other person in the universe. My father, sitting in his armchair, shrouded in his lifelong cloak of silence. I turned my whole body to face him, a prosecutor addressing the key witness. He flinched visibly, as if my gaze were a physical blow. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His gaze darted around the room, landing on a painting on the wall, a floor lamp, anywhere but on me. "Dad?" I said, and the sound of my own voice was strange and distant, as if it were coming from someone else. "I just have one question, and I want you to look at me when you answer it. Did you know?" The room fell instantly, deathly silent. Even my mother's sobs hitched and stopped. All the air had been sucked out of the space, replaced by a terrible, waiting pressure that made my ears pop. Ethan shot a panicked, warning glance at him. My father's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. He swallowed hard, and I could see his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were trembling. In that moment he looked ancient and frail and utterly pathetic. For a split second, a wave of pity washed over me, a ghost of the love I'd always wanted to feel for him. "Richard, don't you dare," my mother whispered, her voice a venomous hiss from across the room. But it was too late. The dam of his silence, the massive wall he had spent a lifetime building to protect himself from conflict, from responsibility, from fatherhood, had finally cracked under the pressure. He slowly, painfully, lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes, for the first time, were not blank or neutral. They were filled with a miserable, cowardly shame that was 1,000 times more painful to witness than any anger would have been. I knew," he stammered, his voice a ragged whisper that was almost lost in the silence. "I knew they were using your name." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. The world tilted on its axis. Mark put a steadying hand on my arm, but I barely felt it. I was in freefall, tumbling through a black, empty space. "You knew," I repeated, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. He nodded, a single, jerky movement, unable to speak. But a horrifying realization was dawning, a final, dark piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "But it was worse than that, wasn't it?" I pressed, my voice barely human. "This wasn't their idea. Not completely." He broke then. The weight of his lifelong cowardice was too much to bear. The truth came spilling out in a pathetic, broken torrent of whispered words. "It was me," he confessed, the tears he had held back for a lifetime finally streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. "I suggested it. I told Ethan. I told him to just borrow your credibility a little, just to get his foot in the door. I told him you were his brother, that you'd understand in the end. I thought once the project was a success, you'd be happy to officially join. I never thought it would go this far." The air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. He hadn't just stood by and watched me drown. He had been the one to hold my head under the water. The years of feeling invisible, of working myself to the bone, of craving a single word of approval from him. It all coalesced into this one, soul-crushing, world-shattering moment. My father, the man whose recognition I had craved more than anything, was the architect of my ultimate betrayal. He hadn't just chosen Ethan over me. He had actively, deliberately sacrificed me for him. Ethan and my mother looked as stunned as I felt. It was clear they had never, ever expected him to confess. They had counted on his silence, his lifelong habit of non-confrontation, to be their final shield. A strange, cold calm washed over me. The pain was so immense it felt like a purifying fire. It burned away the last vestiges of hope I had for them, for the family I thought I wanted, for the father I had always dreamed he could be. This is the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for staying with me until this point. You are amazing. Please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've been on this journey with me. This not only helps more people find this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. I didn't say another word after my father's confession. There was nothing left to say. The truth, in all its ugly, devastating glory, was laid bare on the threadbare carpet of my parents' living room. Mark, reading the look of absolute finality on my face, knew the time for negotiation was over. "You have 48 hours," he announced to the three stunned, silent figures in the room. His voice was crisp and clinical, cutting through the thick emotional fog. He began methodically packing the incriminating documents back into his briefcase. "Dissolve the company. Issue the retractions. A full, notarized report of your compliance must be on my desk by Friday at 5 p.m. If it is not, a copy of this entire file goes to the Denver District Attorney's office first thing Monday morning. Do you understand?" No one answered. They just stared, trapped in the wreckage of their own making. We turned and walked out, leaving the front door hanging open behind us, a final, symbolic breach. The fallout was swifter and more brutal than I could have imagined. Mark, taking no chances, had his firm's litigation department contact Eric Thompson's legal team directly that night. He laid out the situation in stark, unambiguous terms. I was the primary victim of a sophisticated fraudulent scheme perpetrated by my own family members. Thompson, a ruthless but fundamentally fair businessman, was reportedly apoplectic. Not at me, but at having been so thoroughly played for a fool by a charismatic amateur like Ethan. Within hours, the news, stripped of family drama and presented as a cautionary tale of investment fraud, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit, gossipy world of Denver finance and real estate. The name Davis Properties became instantly toxic. Thompson officially and very publicly pulled his letter of intent, and every other potential investor who had been circling the project scattered like cockroaches in the light. Ethan's house of cards didn't just collapse. It was vaporized. His reputation, the only real currency he had ever possessed, was utterly destroyed. He was blacklisted, labeled as a con artist and a fool. The bank loans he had foolishly taken out against the promise of imminent investment capital were immediately called in. The flashy German sports car my parents had helped him buy, his ultimate symbol of golden boy status, was unceremoniously repossessed from their driveway in the middle of the day for all the neighbors to see. His girlfriend, Jessica, the one from the champagne picture in Hawaii, was the first rat off the sinking ship. I heard through the grapevine from Chloe, in a transparently desperate attempt to get back in my good graces, that Jessica had packed her bags the day the news broke. She apparently told a mutual friend, "I'm not tying myself to a sinking ship. He's not just a fraud, he's a failure." Ethan, who had coasted his entire life on a cushion of charm and his parents' money, was facing real-world, tangible consequences for the very first time. He was a golden child who had finally discovered he was only gold-plated, and the cheap, rusting metal underneath was now exposed for the whole world to see. The shrapnel from the explosion hit my parents just as hard. My Uncle Robert, who had been so cheerful on the phone, now refused to take their calls. Whispers and judgments spread through our extended family and their wide social circle. My parents, who had always prided themselves on their image of the perfect, successful family, were suddenly pariahs, the parents of a failed con man. The very image they had sacrificed me to maintain was now in tatters, destroyed by the very son they had elevated above all else. My phone, which had been blissfully silent for days, started ringing again. But the tone of the calls had changed dramatically. The demanding, entitled arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, pathetic desperation. My mother called, sobbing hysterically into the phone. "Liam, you have to stop this. You're tearing this family apart. Your brother is ruined. We made a mistake. Okay? A terrible mistake. Please, let's just fix this as a family. We can work it out. This family is already broken," I thought, but I didn't say it. The time for words was long past. I just listened, my heart a cold, still stone in my chest, until she ran out of breath and desperate pleas. Then I quietly ended the call. The most difficult communication was the one I didn't answer. A call from my father. He only tried once. When I didn't pick up, a voicemail notification appeared a few minutes later. I stood in the dark of my living room for a long time before finally summoning the courage to listen to it. His voice was raspy, broken, a ghost of the strong, confident man I had once wanted him to be. "Liam, I'm so sorry. You were right. In that room, I was a coward. I always have been. I should have been a father to you. A real father. To both of you. I'm so sorry. There it was. The apology I had craved my entire life. And it meant absolutely nothing. It was a deathbed confession from a relationship that had died years ago. It was too little, far too late. It couldn't undo the years of neglect, the constant message of my own inadequacy, or the ultimate soul-crushing betrayal. I took a deep, steadying breath. Then, with a strange sense of calm, a feeling of surgical precision, I went into my phone's contacts. My mother. I tapped her name. Block. Ethan. Tap. Block. My father. I hesitated for just a moment, the ghost of the little boy inside me who just wanted his dad's approval rising up for one last, desperate plea. I silenced him. Tap. Block. It wasn't an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of survival. It was a surgeon removing a malignant cancer. The procedure was painful, yes, but it was absolutely necessary to live. And for the first time, as the silence descended once more, a true, clean, chosen silence, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The 6 months that followed were like waking up from a long, feverish, 32-year-old dream. With the constant, draining noise of my family's drama finally and permanently silenced, my world became quiet. The enormous amount of mental and emotional real estate they had occupied in my head was suddenly vacant. And slowly, cautiously, I began to fill that reclaimed space with my own life. At work, freed from the constant low-level anxiety and distraction, I was on fire. We not only landed the massive contract with the National Logistics Company, but we over-delivered on every metric. The success of that project led to an unexpected feature in a major tech journal, complete with a ridiculously flattering photo of me. Suddenly, Apex Solutions wasn't just a successful small business. It was a name people in the industry knew. My personal salary and the company's valuation skyrocketed again. I was busier and more challenged than ever before, but it was a good kind of busy. It was the pure, unadulterated thrill of building and creating, not the exhausting, soul-crushing stress of defending and surviving. I sold my small, functional apartment and bought a penthouse condo in a new high-rise downtown. It was the kind of place the boy who used to bus tables for bus fare could never have even conceived of. It had floor-to-ceiling windows with a panoramic view that stretched from the glittering city skyline all the way to the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Every morning, I would make a cup of coffee and watch the sunrise paint the peaks in impossible shades of orange and pink, and I felt a profound sense of ownership, not just of the apartment, but of my own life, my own future. I started saying yes to social invitations. I began spending weekends with Mark and his wife, Sarah, and their 2 chaotic, hilarious, wonderful kids. They welcomed me into their loud, loving, messy family dinners without a second thought. Their home was filled with laughter, easy affection, and the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely loved each other. It was everything my childhood home had lacked. They became my anchor, my port in the storm, my chosen family. My assistant, Sarah, ever the quiet supporter, decided I needed a personal life. She cornered me one day and announced she was setting me up on a blind date with her friend, a witty, intelligent architect named Rachel. I was terrified, but I said yes. We met for coffee on a sunny Saturday afternoon. For the first time with a near stranger, I talked about my work without fear of judgment or dismissal, and when she asked about my family, I told her the real, painful truth of it, without shame or embellishment. She listened, her expression full of empathy, not pity. She didn't offer easy platitudes. She just nodded and said, "That sounds incredibly hard. I'm glad you got out." We went on a second date and a third. It was slow and it was easy, and it was the healthiest human interaction I had experienced in years. I was learning day by day how to live. I was discovering that my life didn't have to be a constant reaction to my family's dysfunction. It could be something I designed and built myself on my own terms. The wounds were still there, of course. They showed up as a phantom limb, a dull ache for a father's approval that would sometimes surface late at night when I was alone. But the ache was duller now. It no longer defined me or controlled my decisions. It was just a part of my story, a closed chapter in a book that I was still actively writing. And for the first time in my life, I was genuinely excited to see what the next page would hold. Just when I began to believe that the storm had completely and finally passed, one last, pathetic echo from my old life arrived in the mail. It wasn't a desperate, handwritten letter or a sentimental card. It was a thick, formal, cream-colored envelope with the embossed letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart did a familiar, sickening lurch, that old, conditioned anxiety tightening its icy grip around my chest. Inside was a multi-page letter, filled with dense, impenetrable legalese. It was a formal notice of intent to file a lawsuit. The plaintiff, my mother, Helen Davis. The defendant, me. I had to read it twice, and then a third time, to fully believe the breathtaking audacity of what it contained. She was suing me. My own mother was suing me for familial negligence and infliction of emotional distress. The petition sought a court order to compel me to provide ongoing, substantial financial support, a form of coerced inheritance, for her and my father, citing my moral and filial duty as their successful son. The document went on to claim, in language both laughable and infuriating, that my refusal to share my excessive wealth and my draconian actions against my brother had caused them extreme emotional and financial hardship. It even alleged that my actions had directly contributed to the unfortunate collapse of my brother's promising business career, thereby robbing them of their expected security in their retirement years. They were, in essence, suing me for damages because their attempt to defraud me had failed. I stared at the pages, my mind struggling to process the sheer, pathological delusion of it all. And then, a strange sound bubbled up from my chest. It started as a low chuckle, then grew into a full-blown, uninhibited laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a wild, cathartic, slightly unhinged laugh that came from the depths of my soul, echoing through my quiet, peaceful apartment. The sheer, breathtaking gall of it, the complete, almost awe-inspiring inability to take one single shred of responsibility for their own actions. They had committed multiple felonies, attempted to ruin my reputation and my company, and had been exposed. And their response was not remorse, not shame, but to sue me for not letting them get away with it. That laugh was a final, powerful release. It was the sound of the last, stubborn chain connecting me to them breaking and turning to dust. For months, a small, traitorous part of me had still harbored a sliver of guilt, a nagging, whispering question of whether I had been too harsh, whether there was something more I could have done. That letter, in its magnificent absurdity, burned that last vestige of doubt away completely. It was the final, undeniable proof that my decision to cut them off wasn't just the right choice. It was the only choice a sane person could have made. They were a black hole of entitlement and narcissism, and I had been right to pull myself out of their gravitational pull before I was completely and utterly destroyed. I didn't even feel angry anymore. The anger had been cauterized, leaving behind a clean, calm scar. I just felt done. That evening, I slid the letter across my kitchen island to Mark, who had come over for dinner. He read it, his eyebrows climbing higher and higher up his forehead with every paragraph. When he finished, he put the letter down, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose with a look of weary, profound disbelief. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Is it, though?" I asked, taking a long, slow sip of my beer. He looked up at me then and saw the absolute peace in my eyes. A slow smile spread across his face. "No," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I guess it's not." He tapped the letter with his finger. "Don't you worry about this for 1 second. My firm will handle it pro bono, for the sheer pleasure of it. We'll file a response so scathing and a motion to dismiss so airtight that it'll make their lawyers' hair curl. This is a frivolous, vexatious lawsuit, and we will have it thrown out of court so fast their heads will spin. We may even be able to countersue for legal fees." "I know you will," I said, and I did. I felt no fear, no anxiety, no dread. Just a profound, liberating sense of closure. That letter wasn't a threat. It was a gift. It was their last, desperate, pathetic shot. And it hadn't even scratched me. Tonight, I'm standing out on the balcony of my apartment. The city of Denver glitters below me like a carpet of scattered diamonds against black velvet. The air is cold and clean and thin, and for the first time in my memory, I feel like I can breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. There's no weight on my chest, no knot of anxiety in my stomach. There is just space. For so long, my entire life was a relentless, exhausting climb up a treacherous mountain in the dark. I was driven by a desperate, childish need to reach a summit where I thought my father would finally see me, where my family would finally acknowledge my worth. I was convinced that success was the peak. I thought that $28 million was the magic number, the prize that would finally make them love me, or at the very least, respect me. I was so profoundly wrong. The money didn't change them. It just revealed them. It was a harsh, unforgiving spotlight that illuminated the greed, the entitlement, and the casual cruelty that had been lurking in the shadows all along. My betrayal wasn't born in the heat of that Christmas dinner argument. It was forged decades earlier, in the shadow of a gleaming red convertible, in the deafening silence of a father who consistently chose the path of least resistance over his own son, in the constant, quiet, soul-eroding message that I was worth less. I didn't lose a family. I've come to realize that you can't lose something you never truly had. What I had was a set of obligations, a thankless role I was expected to play in their family drama. I was the responsible one, the fallback plan, the safety net they felt entitled to. And when I refused to play my part any longer, the whole rotten stage collapsed. My worth, I see now, isn't in my bank account balance or the valuation of my company. It's not in the title on my business card or the view from my balcony. My worth was forged in the lonely nights in the university computer lab, in the quiet resilience it took to build something from nothing, and finally, in the terrifying, liberating courage it took to say no. It was found in the moment I chose myself over their conditional, toxic approval. That's a promotion no one can give you, and more importantly, it's a promotion no one can ever take away. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and a toxic family dynamic? Share your story in the comments below. It helps to know we're not alone. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Your support truly means the world.